So, welcome. Hi, everyone to Canada and anyone else in North America that might be watching. My name is Eric Wickler. I'm from GEA, and today we're going to be talking about beer dealcoholization. So let me share my screen here so we can get going. And I think there we go. And we'll get into slideshow. All right. So as I said, yes, I'm Eric Wickler from GEA. I cover all brewing and filling applications. And I'm also joined by Gary Loyne, who is a local to you guys. He is here as from Central City Brewers and Distillers, who is someone who is utilizing our technology. And he'll be joining us in a little bit to give you his thoughts and feedback. So today, the general overview, I'm going to let you know a little bit about me, myself, GEA as well, and then we'll jump into beer dealcoholization, a little bit about the beer market, the technology, and then like I just said, that Gary will take over. At the end, we'll give you the opportunity to ask either of us questions about what we're discussing today. So myself, I come from the brewing industry. I have about 10 years in the brewing industry. I went to UC Davis and studied brewing and fermenting chemistry. From there, I went and have worked in both big and small breweries, those including Anheuser-Busch, Boston Beer Company, and then some other smaller craft regional breweries in Southern California. Came to GEA about a year and a half ago. Really was driven there from my experience in working with the technology and the company. As I like to say, we're sort of the Cadillac of brewing equipment. But we are a very diverse company. So we have our hands in many different industries, as you can see on the slide here: dairy and farming, food, pharmaceutical, chemical, utilities, even our separators are used on big ships out in the ocean. But primarily what I'm most concerned with and focused on is brewery and beverage. And so what we like to say is, approximately half the world's beer production goes through some sort of GEA solution. We have a strong local presence around the globe. You can see all these little blue dots are sort of areas where we have offices and facilities. We're centralized out of Dusseldorf, Germany, but we also have a strong local North American presence, which I'll get to in a little bit. So brewing dealc beer, there's several different methods. We talk about how do we do it the GEA way. So as a company, we cover complete process coverage. So everything from malt handling through brew houses, producing your beer, wort aeration, yeast handling, fermentation, centrifugation, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, membrane filtration, which we're going to be discussing today. But we also do flavor blending solutions. We do carbonation, flash pasteurization, which is also important when you're talking about products that don't have alcohol. And then what's kind of our new innovative piece of technology is our all-in-one line, which is capable of doing bottles, cans, and even PET bottles on the same filler block. So, as a craft brewer, as you're looking to expand, and if you have questions about any of these things, you will be able to get my contact information at the end. So let's jump into it. Membrane filtration. So GEA is the world leader in membrane filtration. We actually started in the dairy industry. We have over 1,000 systems. We've been doing it for 30 years, but we've also now obviously expanded into the beverage world, vegetable, fruit juices, but brewery. So brewery has the most activity locally for reasons while we're discussing today. We use this type of technology for both process streams and process waste streams. So what is cross-flow filtration? So we're used to, as brewers, traditional filtration where you have a single feed passing through a filter media and getting a filtrate. This would be something similar to, a DE filter where large particles are trapped in the media and all the liquid is going through. And comparing that to what the technology we're looking at is you have a single feed, but you actually have two exit streams. You have a filtrate, a permeate, and then a retentate. So we select, depending on what application we're looking at doing, we select a membrane which is microscopically selective to the components. So whatever we're looking to get out will pass through, and whatever we want to retain will stay in. So in this case, we want to remove the alcohol. So membrane filtration types can differ based on your requirements, and the appropriate level of separation is chosen based on several different things. What are your desired product attributes? What are your overall production capacity needs? We use this similar technology for like seltzer production as well. So these are the different levels of filtration. We have microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis. So through this list, you can see increased throughput as we go up the list, and that is really in relation to the pore size. Increased purity is going down, so it's a trade-off. So again, it's all about what are you trying to achieve. When we look at the actual anatomy of a membrane, so we use spiral wound polymetric membranes, and this is an example of one. So GEA is not a manufacturer of membranes. We utilize different suppliers out there in the industry that are well known, but it's really, we adapt and use those membranes in our technology. So we have our general feed solution. You'll see here the selective membranes for whatever we're trying to accomplish, and then small channel spacers to allow the product to move freely. And then you have two, again, streams, either a permeate or a concentrate. When we talk about filtration, it's all about area. So more throughput means more membranes. All right, so we got a little background now on what cross-flow filtration is. How do we apply that to beer dealcoholization? Well, first we ask why. Why are we even talking about this today? So we've obviously seen a trend in the marketplace where a lot of people, brewers, both big and small, are interested in going this route. So, what are the market drivers? There's the big push, I think, is, from the health conscious consumers, people looking for lower calories, people that are looking to kind of get away from alcohol. Obviously the non-alcoholic beverage alternatives, which I think, from my experience, at least working in craft breweries, a lot of smaller craft breweries may have an alternative that they make, like a soda. In my opinion, this is sort of a better way, or a cooler way to go, in the sense that you can still make a great craft beer that doesn't have alcohol. You have pregnant women, obviously, and nursing mothers, and then people who abstain for other reasons. But really, in my opinion, we have new technologies, and these new technologies are allowing us to create better beers. De-alcoholized or non-alcoholic beer has been around for decades, but it's always had this horrible reputation of not tasting very good, right? So this new technology, specifically what we're talking about, in my opinion, makes the best tasting beer. When we look at market share, in total beer sales, the growth of non-alcoholic beer is continuing to grow. Right now, Europe has the majority of the market share. We see a compound annual growth rate of around 7.5%. Well, what does that mean? There's a huge market in North America. So what are the technologies? We have biological methods, stop fermentation, use specialized yeast. We have cross-flow filtration, which we're discussing today, and then thermal process, which is generally what has been used historically, vacuum distillation, so on and so forth. But as I just said, we're talking about cross-flow filtration. So what is the overall principle? You have a feed beer, which in this example, we say, 3 to 8%, but it doesn't have to be in that range. It can be more. You're going to have color and flavor. You're going to have an RO, basically reverse osmosis filter. And then those two exit streams we talked about are water and ethanol. And then the retentate is still going to have ethanol. It's going to have all of your color and your flavor. So one thing to note is there are no membranes that are specific only to ethanol and not water. So in this case, we go through 3 different steps, which is a pre-concentration step, a diafiltration step, and a final blending step. We use diafiltration water as a means to help rinse essentially the alcohol out of the beer. We have different we can either do batch operations from as little as basically 20 hex up to 500 hex a day in a variety of ranges of ABV as low as 0.5%. And really this sort of range is up to the brewer, as far as one, if you're trying to do a legal claim, or two, if you're just trying to do more of a sensory perspective. We also do continuous operation, which would be a high volume for large production breweries. So the first step is our pre-concentration step. So we have our batch storage tank. This would be sort of your filtered finished beer. Now, when I say filtered, it doesn't have to be bright beer, clear beer. It can be some of the most award-winning beers over in Europe are Hefeweizens. Basically, when I say filtered, it means not full of yeast. So whatever your standard production methods are for clarifying your beer would be okay. So we start the system, we start running, we get water and alcohol out one side, and then our retentate, which is our concentrated beer, we say, going back to the beer storage tank. So as we do that, we're obviously pulling water and alcohol out of the solution. So we are going to continue to concentrate this. At some point, we are not going to be able to push more through the membrane. So we have to use diafiltration water to essentially help continue rinsing that alcohol through the membranes. So this, from a brewer's perspective, would be almost identical to sparging, right? So you have your first wort runnings, and then you rinse the sugar out. In this case, we are rinsing the alcohol out. When we've removed the required amount of alcohol, then we back blend our storage tank with our deaerated water. And it's, based on a couple things, obviously volumetrically, you can do that. But again, like I said, it's also sensory perception wise and your target ABV. So walking through kind of the step by step, we're going to fill our batch tank with our beer. We are going to start our process through our RO unit. And this is that pre-concentration step. So one thing to note too here is, in this step, what's coming out of the plant ABV wise is essentially going to be identical to what your base beer was. So if you're starting with a 5% lager or ale, you're basically going to be getting out a 5% alcohol solution over here. Now, I know up in Canada, the seltzer market and laws, regulations are a little bit different than here in the United States. However, what we've considered and what we've looked at is you can use this for a potential secondary stream. If you wanted to use it for a seltzer base, that would also be a potential. Then once we start our diafiltration, you can see that basically the beer batch tank level doesn't really change, because again, you're rinsing the alcohol out. If you continue to collect this all into the same tank, your overall we'll say alcohol range would probably be in the 1 to 2% range, depending on what you started with. And this liquid can be used for secondary process, potentially for rinse, CIP, pre-rinse water or something like that, or you could sewer it. Then we back blend our beer. That then's ready to be discharged for carbonation, pasteurization and filling if you wanted to do straight up de-alc beer. There's also the opportunities to add new ingredients, maybe do a tertiary dry hopping or other ingredients. I mean, sky's the limit. When I talk about these systems, I like to think about it as a tool, a tool in the brewer's toolbox to create new and interesting products. From a CIP standpoint, these are skidded units that have their own integrated CIPs. So everything outside of the skid itself would be your own standard CIP, and however you treat your CIPs. The membranes are they're sensitive, so you have to use a specialized caustic and acids, which are readily available from your local chemical supplier. And the CIP temperatures tend to be slightly lower than what you're probably used to, slightly cooler CIPs. And then if you're not going to be running the plant, then you also have to keep the membranes fresh. So there's basically a storage chemical that you would pack the system with that keeps them viable for your next run. As far as batch operations, and in the equipment that GEA offers, we offer smaller, more manual units, like you can see on the right here, which are conveniently sized for craft brewers, simple controls, and then all the way up to more fully automated versions, like you can see on the left. So it's really it's up to the brewer. How much volume do you want to run? We can run as little as 20 hex in a 24-hour period, up to 500 hex. And generally, when we are running these, we'll run them for approximately 20 hours and then take them down to CIP. When we are comparing the technologies, versus distillation is, like I said, probably one of the more prevalent technologies that are used. We look at first temperature. So one benefit to utilizing membrane filtration is essentially colder processing, running less than 10 C, which from a beer quality standpoint is important. And when you compare that to a distillation method. Aroma losses, and I'm sure Gary will attest when he comes on, but from my experience in the beers I've tasted, it's pretty amazing that the beer that's coming out tastes like beer. The aroma is still there, it's all retained. And again, that's because the membranes are so selective to the compounds that are able to pass through. And when you compare that to distillation, even with distillation, technology where they say they have aroma recovery, it's still, in my opinion, unmatched. When you look at CapEx, it's relatively low for our filtration skids compared to adding, a distillery essentially in your brewery. And another thing that goes hand in hand with that is explosion proofing. So with our membrane filtration, as I said, the alcohol that's coming out of this is never going to be higher than what your base beer is. So you're not going to have those ATEX requirements. So the advantages from the brewer, again, full flavor and aroma retention. All of those compounds are staying in the beer. You have cold processing, which again is super important for quality. The ability to innovate. So new reduced ABV, excuse me, take a sip of water here. Reduced ABV beer styles. So one thing I've sort of said to people, a lot of people out there love double IPAs, right? Well, double IPAs are 9-10% alcohol sometimes. They're loaded with hops. And if that's what you're into, then great, but it's also a big beer, so you can only have one or two of them. Well, maybe why not try pulling some of the alcohol out and still having all of those high, heavy hop flavors and aromas in the beer? So, a session double IPA. Making multiple products from a single base stream. Again, if you have a flagship and one you de-alk it, now you got a de-alk flagship, and then maybe you take that and do something else, dry hop it or add fruit purees. So essentially it's about flexibility. It's brewing the beer you want. You can decide the ABV later. But one note from a brewer, also from a brewer's perspective is, as I mentioned, it's a tool. So what we've seen on hoppier beers is when you remove the alcohol, you might get more of a perceived, a higher perceived bitterness. So how do we account or adjust for that? Well, we may have to tweak our recipes a little bit. So you just want to keep that in mind. From a technical advantage, it's, like I said, you can do filtered or quote unquote unfiltered, yeasted beers, modular designed. Everything that GEA does is hygienically designed. It's compact, skidded, meant to fit in small spaces. And like I talked about earlier, is that integrated CIP. As far as utilizing this technology, GEA offers a couple different options. We have what's called our Model R, which is a small scale unit that you could bring into your brewery to run small batches of volume, maybe up to 20 barrels a day or something like that, 20 hectoliters a day. utilized for proof of concept, potentially trying different membranes and doing some R&D. As I mentioned, we also have a North American presence. So our two main offices, one is based in Hudson, Wisconsin, and there we actually have a manufacturing facility where we build pilot skids, we build filtration skids, we build brew houses, we build spray dryers, so on and so forth. But we also have our pilot facility there, in which you could actually bring your products in and test it with us on a small scale. And that's what you see here, basically piloting. This is a small scale unit where you ship us, 5 kegs of beer. We'd welcome you to come out and check out the facility and meet us, and then taste the beer right as it's coming off the technology. So you can kind of see here from what we discussed earlier, we have basically our surge tank where we transfer your beer into, run it through a single element membrane housing, and we have a small liquid cell basically for creating that diafiltration water. Picture on the right there is just an example of what the ethanol water solution coming off the membrane is. That's how clear it is. So with that, I will introduce and hand it over to Gary Loyne, who's a brewmaster and partner at Central City Brewers up there in Canada. And he's going to just kind of tell you what he thinks, and I'll hand it over to him.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Gary.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Thank you for doing that, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Don. I can see that. Yeah. So I'm here to answer any questions. I have some real-time product out in the market, and if anybody has any questions regarding that or any of the processes, and either myself or Eric can probably help you with that. Right? No. Oh, so I'm reading a question from Alan. And at this moment, we don't have a permeate recovery tank, Alan. So at this time, it just goes to sewer, any of our DL beers. We were talking about maybe recapturing the permeate in a tank, but we don't, at this time, we don't have the infrastructure, but it's something that's on our agenda. And I'm reading from Don. He's asking what recipe adjustments are made. What I find is that during the de-alc process, well, alcohol is body in beer, and when you remove the alcohol, there's a bit of loss in body, and so we tweak recipes to try to make sure that we can get more body in that beer when the alcohol has been removed, and so that's where you can play, and also the reconstituting portion of the where you add the deaerated water back into your what's going to be your de-alc beer. You can play with the amount you're adding on. I guess really, if you're using an example, if you remove 50% of the water, well, you're supposed to put 50% of the. You can put that 100% to that 50% back in, but we typically don't. We have different beers that will, and we're still experimenting. Well, we won't add the 100% of the water that was removed. We'll add different, different percentages of that. And we're still experimenting that with getting, and it comes down to sensory after that. What else is
And Gary, I don't know if there's any questions specifically for me. I don't see the chat that you're looking at. So if there's anything specific, you can shout it out.
Well, there's one that was to you. What are the requirements for the rinse water? Is it deaerated? Because somebody's worried about DO.
Yeah, I mean, obviously deaerated water would be preferable. RO DO water would be even more preferable. Yes, from an oxygen standpoint, for sure, deaerated water would be recommended.
And there's a question from Zach. If you can't see them, it says, what's the practical minimum size this system would work on? When you say 20 hectoliters per day, does that suggest we ought to be running it every day once we have it?
Yeah, so that really depends. So the smaller manual system, again, 20, when we talk about 20 hex a day, that's how small the system is scaled to basically run a barrel or so an hour. So if you wanted to run more volume, then you would look at a bigger system. And if you wanted to run, double the volume, we'd look at a higher capacity system.
There's a message also from Elliot, or a question from Elliot. He's seen some dealcoholized beer that's still 0.2 to 0.5. Is there any way to get it down to 0.0?
I don't think any technology can tell you 0.000. I mean, that's sort of like hand sanitizer is never 100% effective, right? It's 99.999% effective. With this technology, you can get below 0.5. You go down to 0.05. You could, I guess, potentially go lower. It would really be dependent on how much diafiltration water you're adding.
So there's a couple questions for me. Somebody's asked how low in alcohol are we going to? We find that we get our beers down to 0.3 to 0.4, but we still, on the can, we still just market less than 0.5. And we've had really good success. Right now, we're only putting out 2 beers, the DEALC IPA and a DEALC Pilsner. And I could tell you that if I gave you my DEALC Pilsner, and without telling you it was DEALC, you wouldn't even know. You would think you're drinking a straight up Pilsner. It's that close. One thing you do notice, what I mentioned before, is a bit of body loss, but that seems to be less of an issue in the Pilsners. Usually Pilsners are, when you mash them, they're crisp and clean and not a ton of body in them anyway. So we find that's the closest, but on our IPA, we do have to make adjustments to get more body, but we find the aroma, and Derek is right. We have amazing aroma in our IPA coming out of that DEALC IPA.
Gary, in your recipe development, when you kind of settle on your final alcohol, like you said, wasn't exactly at whatever the label says, maybe a little less. Did you do bench blends and trials to kind of find your happy place, or how did you come to that?
Yeah, I mean, we first did our IPA. We just did strictly our IPA, which is 6.5%, and we did notice like the body, and it did increase in perceived bitterness, which you mentioned. And so we actually just went to a specific recipe designed for that DEALC system to go into that. And I can say that we're still playing around with it a little bit, but it's pretty close. But I think we won't ever stop tweaking, whether it's recipe side or whether it's on the functionality of the actual DEALC system itself, which it is, like Eric says, it is a tool. And there's many ways that you can optimize from both ends to try to get a product that you're looking for. I see a question there, Eric. So what kind of budget are we looking for the 20 hectoliter unit?
My contact information is there on the screen. If you would like to reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to discuss. I mean, I think, the purpose of this presentation is really to talk more specifically about the technologies and benefits. But as I mentioned, we offer a variety of different technologies, and I'd be completely happy to talk to you about that offline.
And I see a question too. It says, is it possible to repurpose the alcohol water solution for production of seltzers, or does that require a further distillation step?
So in my, and Gary, you probably know what kind of what it tastes like. There is a tinge of aroma. I think it's also dependent on what is in your base beer, on some of the organics that can make it through the membrane. I would say that the base is very clean and would be easily cleaned up with maybe some simple carbon filtration. If depending on what kind of seltzer you're producing, if you're adding different ingredients or flavors, that might be enough to cover it up. So again, it's a very much customer dependent, in my experience.
Yeah, we noticed a bit of a flavor to it. And I agree. I think just running it through charcoal filtration or whatever, it would be would clean it up completely. And yes, you could use it in a seltzer, and that's kind of why we're looking at it at the moment. Yeah. I see another one. It says the USA has recently said last year that zero alcohol needs to be non-detectable, and thus they say less than 0.03, or did that mean 0.3? I'm not sure, but it says 0.03.
Yeah, I mean I'm not sure. I know every country has different regulations. I would say when you're at that levels, you could almost argue that it's within plus or minus, variable. So if there is specific regulation that's saying you have to be lower than 0.03%, I'm unaware of it. What I'm familiar with is the 0.5%.
I'm also unaware of it. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, I don't know if I can see him. Oh, so now the Keith Armstrong has mentioned, they specifically now say that 0.05 is not alcohol free. Yeah, I'm unaware of that myself.
Yeah. Keith, send me an email. I want to know about that.
And Don Ferry has asked, is this proprietary technology or is it the same technology as the alchemeter from ProBrew?
I cannot speak to ProBrew's technology. I can tell you that our technology is proprietary.
All right, if there's no other questions, I guess we've been asked to wrap it up here. And
well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gary, and everyone up there north of where I am. Again, feel free to reach out with any questions, follow-up questions. My contact is there.
Right. Thank you, everybody.
Hey there, I'm back. Thank you, Eric and Gary, for that presentation. And thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing the beer, Gary, because I've told people there is always street legal in my fridge. You never know when you want to have a beer and you don't want to have the alcohol. So that was interesting and hopefully good food for thought for other breweries. I'd like to thank Mile 37 for their Mile 37 Canning for their sponsorship of this whole stream this morning, and KPU. Thank you, KPU. I guess I'll admit I work there. Thank you for sponsoring this session. And I think the biggest thank you that probably is going to come when I look out to all our students that I see online here listening. And I hope in that one on CIP yesterday, you all said, oh, I remember all that stuff. So yeah, my thanks to KPU for starting the program, both to help the industry have a source of skilled brewers, and hey, for giving me some way of staying reconnected to the industry. We're going to stop now so you can all have a beer and your lunch, and we'll start back up at 2 o'clock, where we're going to hear from Kevin Smith and Shondi McDonald, who are with the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they're going to be talking to us about the new, well, they're not new, they were due, they came into effect last summer, about the requirements for traceability under the Safe Food for Canadians Act. And this is the law. This isn't just a good idea. So come back at 2 o'clock and listen to it. And thank you to Glenmore Custom Print for sponsoring that session. We'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock.
I came to KPU a little bit later in life. I had won some local homebrew awards, and coming here I think was invaluable in breaking some of my bad habits that I may have picked up and just developed in the garage. There is a big demand, I believe, for educated, dedicated brewers. Experience certainly helps out a lot, but experience is only get you so far. I think KPU's program really instills in you the value of consistency and really helps prepare you for having to be consistent in the brew house. It was not sitting in a lecture hall with 100 other people listening to somebody drone on. It was a small classroom size. Instructors could get everybody involved and really could be interactive. There are other programs around that prepare you to maybe run the bottling line, maybe run the keg washer, maybe run the cellar. I think our program prepares you to bypass a few of those steps, so to speak, and just go straight into the brew house. And I think that if I hadn't have come here, I would have been starting at the bottom and trying to work my way up. And I think the fact that KPU is recognized by the MBAA, Master Brewers Association of the Americas, carries a lot of weight in the brewing industry. I think the education at KPU gives you the foundation that you can really take anywhere in the brewing industry. My name is Adam. I am the lead production brewer at Scuttlebutt Brewing Company in Everett, Washington, as well as being a KPU brewing alumnus.